Ernest Shackleton's name has become synonymous with the indomitable will to survive against all odds. His extraordinary journey to the Antarctic, marked by relentless challenges and incredible feats of leadership, transcends the realm of exploration to embody the essence of human perseverance. Shackleton's story is not just one of navigating icy wilderness and facing the most extreme conditions on Earth. It is a saga of hope, resilience, and the power of leadership in the darkest of times. His remarkable ability to keep his crew alive through an unimaginable ordeal, coupled with his unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit, ensures that his legacy continues to inspire adventurers, leaders, and dreamers around the world. As we reflect on his life and the lessons it holds, Shackleton's story serves as a powerful reminder that even when the path ahead seems impossible, the will to endure can light the way. In the desolate, frozen reaches of the Weddell Sea, a ship stands imprisoned by a shifting prison of ice. The wind howls across the barren expanse, where the temperature drops far below anything tolerable for human life. Amid this hostile wilderness stands the Endurance, locked, creaking, and cracking as the pressure of the Antarctic ice begins to crush its hull. Snowflakes fall silently on the ship's deck, where a bearded man in heavy fur-lined clothing stares out over the horizon, not with fear, but with resolve. That man is Sir Ernest Shackleton, and behind his calm exterior lies one of the most unyielding spirits in the history of exploration. His gaze isn't just fixed on the distant landscape. It's focused on survival, leadership, and the unwavering will to bring every one of his men back alive. To understand Shackleton is to look into the heart of ambition coupled with deep humanity. He was not the first to dream of reaching the Antarctic, but he was among the few who dreamed bigger. Not just to plant a flag, but to cross an entire continent encased in ice. What sets Shackleton apart from many of his contemporaries isn't just what he attempted, but how he responded when those grand visions fell apart. It is in failure, not success, that the measure of Shackleton's greatness can be truly found. When the Endurance became trapped and later destroyed by the merciless pack ice, the goal of crossing Antarctica was lost. What remained was survival, not just of the self, but of an entire crew, far from rescue, with limited supplies and no contact with the outside world. In this grim scenario, Shackleton's leadership, compassion, and indomitable spirit transformed a looming tragedy into one of the greatest survival stories ever told. To place Shackleton's story in context, we must consider the age in which he lived, an era now called the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. It was a time, roughly spanning from the late 19th century to the early 20th century, when vast swathes of the world's southernmost continent were still unexplored and unmapped. The allure of the unknown called to men who were not just adventurers, but scientists, visionaries, and national heroes. Robert Falcon Scott, Roald Amundsen, and others risked everything to reach what was once considered the last untouched frontier on Earth. These explorers set out with primitive gear by modern standards, facing weather and terrain so hostile that even survival, let alone discovery, was a monumental achievement. For many of them, it was a journey from which they would never return. Against this backdrop, Shackleton's story stands out not only for its daring, but also for its humanity. While others were celebrated for reaching distant goals or dying in pursuit of them, Shackleton's renown came from keeping his crew alive against impossible odds. His decisions, to turn back when others might have pressed on, to sacrifice glory for the welfare of his men, to lead with compassion rather than command, are what make his tale more than just an adventure. It becomes a profound meditation on endurance, moral leadership, and the strength of the human spirit. In the decades since Shackleton's death, his legacy has only grown. Modern business schools teach his leadership as a model of crisis management. Psychologists analyze his emotional intelligence and his ability to maintain morale under duress. Survival experts marvel at how he calculated risks and sustained hope in a situation that seemed hopeless. His name has become a symbol of resilience and ethical leadership, not because he succeeded in reaching his original goals, but because he achieved something far more meaningful, saving every life under his care. To understand how such a man came to be, we must travel back to the early years of his life, to the world that shaped his instincts, his values, and his restlessness. Ernest Shackleton was born on February 15, 1874, in Kilkea, County Kildare, Ireland, into an Anglo-Irish family. His father, Henry Shackleton, was a farmer-turned-doctor, while his mother, Henrietta, came from a lineage of Quakers. When Ernest was 10, the family moved to London, where his father began practicing medicine, seeking better opportunities in the city. Though his upbringing was not wealthy, it was one steeped in education and responsibility. The young Shackleton was curious, intelligent, and brimming with energy, but he did not fit neatly into the traditional academic mold. He found school rigid and confining, his performance often average, and his temperament more suited to hands-on experience than rote memorization. He read voraciously, however, and was particularly drawn to tales of exploration, sea voyages, and far-off lands. These early literary adventures planted the seeds of wanderlust in his heart. At just 16, Shackleton defied the expectations of following his father into medicine, and instead joined the mercantile marine. His parents, though reluctant, recognized his determination and allowed him to pursue the sea. This decision marked the beginning of a life defined by the ocean and the unknown. His early maritime career took him across the globe, from the Americas to the Far East, giving him not only seafaring skills but also a growing confidence in his ability to handle adversity. On board ships, Shackleton revealed early signs of what would later define him as a leader. He was sociable, often forming strong bonds with crewmates across class and rank lines. He possessed a natural charisma and could boost morale with humor and conversation. Even at this young age, he disliked authoritarianism and believed leadership should be earned through integrity and respect, not merely demanded by title. This attitude would later prove critical in moments of life and death. His restlessness grew as he matured. Though he had achieved respectable ranks in the merchant navy, the desire for something greater, something more meaningful, burned within him. The Antarctic, barely touched by humankind, represented the ultimate frontier, and by the turn of the 20th century, Britain had begun investing in polar expeditions. Shackleton saw his opportunity to join history. With his experience at sea, knowledge of navigation, and hunger for exploration, he was accepted into Captain Robert Falcon Scott's Discovery Expedition of 1901 to 1904. In many ways, this would be Shackleton's true baptism into the world of polar exploration. As third officer aboard the Discovery, Shackleton joined one of the earliest major scientific efforts to explore the Antarctic interior. The expedition was a blend of hardship, discovery, and camaraderie, as men lived together for years in the harshest environment on Earth. During this time, Shackleton distinguished himself by his work ethic, sociability, and growing grasp of the dangers and demands of polar travel. He participated in a grueling sledging journey toward the South Pole alongside Scott and Dr. Edward Wilson, during which he suffered from exhaustion and illness, ultimately forcing his return home before reaching the objective. Though disappointed, this setback did not diminish Shackleton's ambition. Instead, it clarified his purpose. He now had first-hand experience of what Antarctic exploration required, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. He resolved that he would return, but this time as leader of his own expedition. He believed he had more to offer, more to prove, and perhaps most crucially, a vision of leadership different from Scott's, one that prioritized the well-being of the men even above the mission itself. Thus began a journey not just across ice, but into the deeper regions of courage, sacrifice, and survival. Shackleton's life was never about easy victories or straightforward glory. It was about the will to act when all else seemed lost, to inspire when the ice had destroyed hope, and to lead not from behind a desk, but from the front, with frozen boots and frostbitten fingers. What shaped such a man? It was a childhood marked by questioning and independence, a young adulthood seasoned by storms at sea, and an imagination forever haunted by white horizons. In the shadow of failure and the cold embrace of the Antarctic, Shackleton would forge his legacy, not in the pursuit of conquest, but in the salvation of souls. His story was only beginning. In the early years of the 20th century, as the world teetered on the edge of modernity, a great fascination still lingered with the unknown, and nowhere was more mysterious and alluring than the frozen continent of Antarctica. It was into this forbidding realm of ice and peril that a young Ernest Shackleton stepped when he joined the Discovery Expedition of 1901 to 1904, led by Captain Robert Falcon Scott. Shackleton, appointed as third officer, was an ambitious 27-year-old merchant navy officer who had spent over a decade at sea. Though his formal education had been unremarkable, his real schooling came from storms and stars, ship decks, and foreign ports. Antarctica promised him a chance at more than career advancement. It offered a place in history. The Discovery Expedition, officially known as the British National Antarctic Expedition, was the first official British exploration of Antarctica since James Clark Ross's voyage some 60 years earlier. Its goal was both scientific and exploratory, backed by the Royal Geographical Society and the Royal Society. For Britain, this was a matter of prestige and imperial pride, a reassertion of its intellectual and naval leadership. Scott, a naval officer with no polar experience, was chosen to lead, and Shackleton, with his merchant marine background, stood out among applicants as intelligent, energetic, and personable, qualities valued in such an extreme and isolating mission. The Discovery sailed from the Isle of Wight on August 6, 1901. Shackleton's role as third officer placed him in charge of shipboard logistics, stores, and provisions, a critical task for a multi-year mission where a single miscalculation could result in starvation or death. From the outset, he took his responsibilities seriously and proved himself not only dependable but invaluable. His warmth, good humor, and love of poetry made him a popular figure among the men. He organized games, musical evenings, and reading sessions to boost morale during the dark polar winters, when the sun disappeared for months and psychological strain bore down on every soul aboard. Life aboard the Discovery was unlike anything the men had known. After the ship anchored in McMurdo Sound and became icebound, the expedition members established a base and prepared for the long winter. The cold was unforgiving, with temperatures dropping below -40 degrees Celsius. Food had to be carefully rationed, clothing was inadequate by today's standards, and the physical labor of maintaining camp, managing sled dogs, and preparing scientific studies drained everyone. Shackleton, though untested in this environment, proved resilient. He embraced the hardship with a mixture of determination and curiosity. His jovial personality masked a burning ambition and deep psychological strength, qualities that kept him functional while others struggled with isolation and despair. Scott's leadership style was formal and hierarchical, shaped by the Royal Navy's strict traditions. Shackleton, on the other hand, was more egalitarian, often mingling freely with the crew and treating subordinates with warmth and empathy. This difference, while subtle at first, would later spark tension. Shackleton's natural leadership qualities were evident, and his popularity with the men may have caused Scott to feel undermined. Still, early in the mission, the two maintained a functional, if not entirely warm, relationship. They shared a mutual respect for each other's abilities, and Shackleton deferred to Scott's authority, even when his instincts sometimes suggested otherwise. The real trial of Shackleton's time on the Discovery came in late 1902, when he joined Scott and Dr. Edward Wilson on a historic journey toward the South Pole. The three men set out on November 2 with sledges, dogs, and enough provisions to last for a grueling multi-week march across the ice. It was to be a test not only of endurance but of teamwork, judgment, and sheer willpower. They faced brutal winds, blinding snow, and terrain riddled with crevasses. The dogs died or were sacrificed, their bodies used to feed the remaining animals and supplement the men's meager rations. Scurvy loomed over them, their teeth loosened and gums bled, and frostbite gnawed at their hands and feet. Shackleton, who had seemed robust at first, began to falter. He developed bronchitis, suffered from dysentery, and lost alarming amounts of weight. Despite his suffering, he did not complain, and he continued to contribute as much as he could, dragging sledges and encouraging the others. Wilson later recalled Shackleton's stoicism and refusal to burden others with his ailments, even when clearly weakened. Scott, ever the disciplinarian, viewed Shackleton's condition as a liability and made the controversial decision to send him home on the relief ship Morning in early 1903, while the rest of the party remained. This was a devastating blow for Shackleton. He had risked everything for this chance, and now, with the expedition unfinished and the pole unreached, he was being removed. The official reason was medical, and indeed he was sick, but it felt like rejection. Some scholars suggest that Scott's decision may have been influenced not only by Shackleton's health, but also by their interpersonal dynamics and the threat Scott may have perceived in Shackleton's growing influence. Regardless of motive, the effect on Shackleton was profound. It was a moment of both humiliation and revelation, a low point that would later serve as the foundation for his greatest achievements. When Shackleton returned to England, he found himself caught in a peculiar position. He was not lauded as a hero, nor dismissed as a failure. He gave lectures, resumed work with the Merchant Navy, and began to cultivate relationships with sponsors and scientific societies. All the while, the experience of Antarctica haunted him. The white emptiness, the brutal beauty, the test of endurance, all had left a permanent mark on his soul. But more than that, the forced return ignited something deep within him, a desire to lead, to return, and to prove that he could do what Scott could not. Shackleton began to envision his own expedition, one where he would be in command, and where he could shape the journey by his own ideals, placing not only exploration but the welfare and morale of his men at the forefront. He had learned hard lessons aboard the Discovery, about logistics, survival, leadership, and the fragility of human life in the Antarctic. Most importantly, he had learned what not to do. He had watched Scott push the limits of physical endurance without sufficient regard for the individual or the psychological toll. Shackleton's vision would be different. His Antarctic would not be a place of martyrdom, but a stage for resilience, teamwork, and survival. This formative experience gave birth to the qualities that would later define Shackleton's legacy. The illness that sent him home, far from diminishing his spirit, had sharpened it. He knew that physical strength alone could not conquer Antarctica. It demanded adaptability, empathy, and a profound understanding of human nature. These insights would serve him well when he returned to the ice, not once, but twice more, in expeditions that would test every facet of his leadership. In hindsight, Shackleton's time aboard the Discovery was a crucible. It broke down illusions and romantic ideals of exploration, revealing instead the grinding, brutal reality of polar life. It exposed weaknesses, in his body, in leadership structures, and in logistical planning, but it also refined his vision. By the time he stepped off the ship and back into the world, he was no longer just a naval officer with dreams of glory. He was a man who had seen death, tasted failure, and yet emerged with a greater purpose. What might have ended the aspirations of a lesser man only fueled Shackleton's determination. The cold had not broken him, it had forged him. The tension with Scott, the illness, and the forced return all became part of the mythology he would later construct, not just a man of exploration, but a man of profound resilience. Shackleton had now touched the edge of the world and discovered that the real journey was within, to lead not just through command, but through inspiration, trust, and above all, endurance. When Ernest Shackleton returned to England from the Discovery expedition, he was still recovering from the blow of having been sent home early. Though he remained in good standing with his peers and the public, he carried within him a restless sense of unfinished business. The lure of Antarctica, its terrible beauty and brutal silence, called to him with growing insistence. Shackleton's thoughts turned constantly toward a return, not as a subordinate, but as the leader of his own expedition. He was determined to reach the South Pole, the last great prize of terrestrial exploration, and to achieve it under British command. That ambition would lead to the conception of the Nimrod expedition, a journey that would test every resource, challenge, and ideal he possessed. The first and most grueling challenge Shackleton faced in preparing for the expedition was not environmental, but financial. Unlike government-sponsored naval missions, Shackleton's venture would be largely private, and that meant raising a significant sum of money through sponsors, lectures, and scientific institutions. Britain's interest in Antarctic exploration remained high, but the nation was also becoming cautious about funding dangerous and expensive expeditions with uncertain results. Shackleton tirelessly lobbied the Royal Geographical Society and the British public, framing his expedition not merely as a bid for fame, but as a continuation of Britain's historic leadership in science and discovery. He promised valuable meteorological, geological, and magnetic data, as well as a credible attempt at reaching the South Pole. Though he managed to secure some backing, including support from the Royal Scottish Geographical Society and a £20,000 donation from the British government, the expedition was always short of funds. Shackleton also took out personal loans and secured sponsorships in exchange for naming rights or exclusive publication agreements. He acquired an aging Norwegian whaling ship, which he renamed Nimrod. Though not purpose-built for Antarctic voyages, she was refitted for polar service and outfitted with new engines, equipment, and supplies. Shackleton understood that success would require not only funding and courage, but extraordinary logistical planning. Every item, from pemmican to dog harnesses, had to be chosen with care, knowing it might one day mean the difference between life and death. He assembled a team of men that blended experience with raw enthusiasm. The final crew included scientists, surveyors, naval officers, and hardened seamen, among them Frank Wild, Jameson Adams, and the geologist Sir Edgeworth David. Shackleton's leadership style began to take clearer shape here. Unlike Scott, he rejected rigid hierarchy in favor of a more collaborative spirit. He believed morale was as important as rations, and he aimed to inspire his men through respect and shared purpose, rather than intimidation or detachment. The Nimrod set sail from London in August 1907, and after stopovers in New Zealand, she began her southward voyage. By January 1908, they were nearing the frozen coastline of the Ross Dependency. One major obstacle immediately emerged. Captain Scott had claimed McMurdo Sound, the preferred base location, as a reserved area for his future use. Though Shackleton had promised not to infringe upon it, he was ultimately forced by ice conditions and practical necessity to ignore that agreement. The expedition established its base camp at Cape Royds, near the familiar territory of Ross Island. It was a decision that would later draw criticism, but one that ultimately allowed the mission to survive. Setting up camp at Cape Royds was a monumental task. The men constructed a prefabricated wooden hut, affectionately named the Nimrod Hut, which would become their home through the long Antarctic winter. The team faced near-immediate challenges. Food supplies had to be rationed carefully, and equipment tested in the bitter cold. The ponies they brought as draft animals, chosen over dogs for their supposed reliability, struggled mightily in the snow and ice. Mechanical transport also failed early on. The motor car they brought, one of the earliest uses of such a machine in Antarctica, proved completely unsuited for the terrain. These setbacks might have doomed a less prepared or adaptable party. Shackleton, however, remained calm and focused. He adapted plans, redistributed supplies, and encouraged his men with tireless energy and optimism. Perhaps the most dramatic and defining moment of the Nimrod expedition came with Shackleton's attempt to reach the South Pole. On October 29, 1908, he set out from Cape Royds with Frank Wild, Jameson Adams, and Eric Marshall, hauling loaded sledges across the Ross ice shelf. It would be a journey of nearly 1,700 miles round trip, through some of the harshest terrain on Earth. The early stages were brutal but manageable, with clear weather and tolerable winds. As they pressed deeper into the Antarctic interior, however, the environment grew ever more punishing. Temperatures dropped, wind speeds increased, and the physical demands of hauling sledges grew unspeakably severe. Still, they pushed forward, using skis and man-hauling methods, navigating crevasses and blizzards. Their route took them up the Beardmore Glacier, one of the largest glaciers in the world, where the altitude and cold intensified. The men suffered frostbite, snow blindness, and extreme exhaustion. Rations ran dangerously low. Each mile became a contest between ambition and survival. And yet they continued, driven by the allure of history and the iron will of their leader. Shackleton was fully aware of the risks, but he also believed deeply in the moral obligation of leadership, never to sacrifice lives for glory. On January 9, 1909, having reached 88 degrees 23 minutes south, a mere 97 geographical miles from the South Pole, Shackleton made the most painful and admirable decision of his career. He ordered the party to turn back. To some, that moment might have seemed a failure. But to Shackleton, it was a triumph of judgment. They had come closer to the pole than anyone in history, beating even Scott's record, and they were still alive. The return journey was harrowing, with all 4 men near the limits of physical collapse. They survived on reduced rations, eating pony meat and the occasional penguin or seal. They were close to starvation when they finally reached the coast in February 1909 and were picked up by the Nimrod. Their faces were drawn and bodies emaciated, but they were alive and victorious in their own way. In addition to the South Pole attempt, the expedition accomplished other remarkable feats. One was the first descent of Mount Erebus, the active volcano that towers over Ross Island. The climb, led by Edgeworth David and Douglas Mawson, was dangerous and physically demanding. They reached the crater after days of hiking over volcanic rock and ice, collecting geological samples and gaining valuable scientific data. It was a significant achievement, showcasing not only courage but scientific rigor. The expedition also conducted magnetic surveys and geological investigations, providing critical information about the Earth's magnetic field and the composition of the Antarctic continent. Shackleton's team collected fossils, rock samples, and meteorological data that would feed into scientific studies for years to come. Their observations on the southern aurora and the behavior of glaciers were pioneering at the time. For all the public excitement about the race to the pole, the Nimrod expedition remained rooted in the ideals of science and exploration, a duality that Shackleton managed to balance with unusual effectiveness. When the Nimrod returned to England in June 1909, the expedition was greeted with tremendous acclaim. Shackleton was hailed as a national hero. Despite not reaching the South Pole, his leadership, the proximity of their advance, and the survival of all involved won public admiration. More importantly, he had shown a different kind of heroism, one based on foresight, responsibility, and moral strength. King Edward VII knighted him shortly after his return, and newspapers, societies, and universities rushed to honor him. His lectures drew large audiences. He published an account of the expedition, The Heart of the Antarctic, which was widely read and praised. The knighthood marked the beginning of Shackleton's transformation from obscure naval officer to legendary explorer. He was now Sir Ernest Shackleton, a man who had nearly conquered the last great frontier and lived to tell the tale. Yet fame did not bring him wealth. His debts remained considerable, and though he found temporary work as a lecturer and author, he struggled to maintain financial stability. His restless nature, that same drive which had carried him across the ice, made peacetime life in England feel dull and claustrophobic. His thoughts inevitably turned back toward Antarctica. The Nimrod expedition, though often overshadowed in popular memory by his later endurance mission, was in many ways Shackleton's finest hour. It proved he could plan and execute a polar journey, lead men under unimaginable pressure, and make difficult decisions with wisdom and humility. He had shown that courage was not merely about advancing, but about knowing when to retreat. The near success in reaching the pole and the host of scientific discoveries cemented the expedition as one of the great achievements of the heroic age of Antarctic exploration. Shackleton's name was now etched into the pantheon of explorers. He was compared to the likes of Livingstone and Franklin, men who had ventured into the great unknown and come back transformed. But Shackleton, unlike some of his predecessors, had brought his men home. In the years to come, this would become a defining feature of his legacy, not just reaching far, but leading wisely. The Nimrod expedition had fulfilled a national hunger for adventure and reaffirmed Britain's standing in the great age of exploration. Yet for Shackleton himself, it was only a chapter. The ice had not released its grip on his imagination. There was still a continent to cross, a pole to reach, and a story yet to be written. The early years of the 20th century witnessed one of the most dramatic and ambitious chapters in the history of exploration: the race to the South Pole. Nations and individuals alike were gripped by a fervent desire to reach this remote, inhospitable place at the bottom of the world, not only for scientific prestige, but also for the glory of planting their flag in the ice before anyone else. Ernest Shackleton, already a seasoned polar explorer, found himself in the thick of this fierce competition. But while others raced for the pole itself, Shackleton's ambitions would soon evolve into something even more daring. By 1910, the race had narrowed down to two primary contenders: Roald Amundsen of Norway and Robert Falcon Scott of Britain. Both men had different philosophies and approaches to polar exploration. Amundsen, meticulous and calculated, focused on speed, efficiency, and the wisdom of indigenous Arctic techniques. He relied heavily on dog teams and fur clothing, drawing inspiration from the Inuit people. Scott, on the other hand, embodied a more traditional British approach, emphasizing discipline and scientific inquiry, relying on a mixture of ponies, motor sledges, and man-hauling, methods that would later prove problematic. In December 1911, Amundsen achieved what had once seemed impossible. He and his team reached the South Pole, planting the Norwegian flag in triumph. His success was the result of exceptional planning, a deep understanding of the environment, and an unwavering commitment to adaptation. A month later, Scott and his team reached the pole only to find Amundsen had beaten them. Crushed but dignified, Scott and his party turned back, embarking on a harrowing journey home. Tragically, none of them survived the return. Their bodies, along with their journals, were found months later, frozen in the desolate Antarctic wilderness. The British public mourned their heroic failure, and Scott's legacy was immortalized as a symbol of courage and endurance. For Shackleton, who had once come within 97 miles of the pole during the Nimrod expedition, these developments were profound. Though he had failed to reach the ultimate geographic goal, he had returned with honor and without loss of life, a feat that had earned him a knighthood and national respect. Yet, the successes and failures of Amundsen and Scott compelled him to re-evaluate his own objectives. With the pole now conquered, the next great prize in Antarctic exploration became clear: the first overland crossing of the entire continent. Shackleton's new vision was bold and unprecedented. Instead of racing to a single point, he would journey across the harshest terrain on Earth from sea to sea, through the South Pole, completing a traverse that no one had yet dared to attempt. Driven by this ambition, Shackleton began planning the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. The mission would involve 2 ships, Endurance, which would land Shackleton's main party on the Weddell Sea side of Antarctica, and Aurora, which would land a supporting team on the opposite Ross Sea side. While Shackleton's team made the transcontinental crossing, the Ross Sea party would lay critical supply depots along the final leg of the route to support the journey across. This expedition would require not only audacious planning and robust leadership, but also immense resources, financial, human, and logistical. By 1913, Shackleton had begun assembling support for his next expedition. Fundraising, however, proved a significant challenge. Though he was a known public figure, Shackleton had to tap into a wide network of donors, sponsors, and institutions. He lobbied the British government, appealing to both national pride and scientific merit. Eventually, he secured £10,000 from the government, a substantial sum at the time, and garnered contributions from private backers including wealthy patrons such as Sir James Caird. Shackleton also turned to public lectures, merchandise, and media support to rally enthusiasm and raise funds. He demonstrated not only determination but a knack for promotion, using his fame to garner widespread attention. Planning such an expedition also involved solving countless logistical puzzles. Equipment, clothing, rations, navigation tools, and medical supplies had to be meticulously sourced and tested. Shackleton paid close attention to every detail, from the quality of tents to the strength of sledges. Aware of the punishing Antarctic climate, he ensured his men were equipped with warm clothing and high-calorie food. Most importantly, he needed a ship that could brave the pack ice of the Weddell Sea. The vessel he acquired, originally built for polar conditions, was rechristened Endurance after his family motto, "By endurance we conquer." The choice of crew was a defining aspect of Shackleton's leadership. He famously prioritized character over technical skill. He understood that in the face of the Antarctic's relentless hostility, resilience, cooperation, and spirit would prove more valuable than any formal qualification. To that end, he personally interviewed many of the applicants, often relying on intuition. Stories abound of his unconventional methods. He is said to have asked candidates how they handled boredom, what kind of music they enjoyed, or whether they could be cheerful under pressure. The final roster included seamen, scientists, a photographer, and a surgeon. Some, like Frank Wild and Tom Crean, had served with Shackleton before and were veterans of the ice. Others, like the young meteorologist Leonard Hussey, were selected as much for their good humor as for their expertise. Among the most remarkable members of the crew was Frank Worsley, the ship's captain, whose navigation skills would later become crucial to the survival of the expedition. Another key figure was Thomas Ord-Lees, a motor expert whose mechanical knowledge, though of limited use in the ice, reflected the growing role of technology in polar exploration. The ship's photographer, Frank Hurley, would go on to produce some of the most iconic images of polar exploration ever captured. Shackleton forged a bond with his men, encouraging a sense of unity and shared purpose that would become essential in the trials to come. As the departure date approached, the world was entering a new and uncertain era. In August 1914, Britain declared war on Germany, and the First World War had begun. The outbreak of hostilities cast a shadow over Shackleton's plans. With patriotic fervor sweeping the nation, he even offered the services of his ship and men to the government. However, he received a telegram from First Lord of the Admiralty Winston Churchill. Proceed. Shackleton's expedition was allowed to continue, partly because it was seen as a beacon of British ambition and endurance in a time of crisis. The public reaction to the Endurance expedition was a mixture of admiration and curiosity. Newspapers covered the preparations with enthusiasm, emphasizing the boldness of Shackleton's objective. The British public, still mourning Scott and proud of Amundsen's achievement, saw Shackleton as a figure who combined bravery with pragmatism. He wasn't just aiming for glory. He sought to achieve something never before attempted. His emphasis on safety and scientific exploration made him a symbol of responsible leadership and visionary ambition. By late 1914, the Endurance was ready. Painted black and white, strengthened with greenheart timbers, and fitted with the latest equipment of the time, she embodied the spirit of the age, rugged, elegant, and daring. She was designed to withstand the crushing pressures of the Antarctic ice, but as Shackleton would soon discover, even the sturdiest ship can be no match for nature's most brutal domain. The men climbed aboard with high hopes, unaware that they were about to face one of the most harrowing survival stories in human history. In sum, the period between 1911 and 1914 marks a turning point in Shackleton's life. While the world focused on the race to the pole, he redirected his energy toward an even greater challenge: the crossing of the Antarctic continent. Inspired by triumphs and tragedies alike, he formulated a plan that would test every ounce of human strength and resilience. With careful preparation, bold leadership, and an exceptional team, he launched an expedition that would forever etch his name into the annals of exploration, not for reaching a destination, but for what he endured along the way. In late 1914, Ernest Shackleton's expedition ship, the Endurance, slipped her moorings and sailed south toward the Weddell Sea, the beginning of a voyage that would become one of the most remarkable survival stories in the history of exploration. Shackleton and his crew of 27 men had set out to make the first land crossing of the Antarctic continent from coast to coast via the South Pole, a feat no one had yet achieved. Their spirits were high, their ship sturdy and well-provisioned, and their leader experienced and resolute. But as they pushed deeper into the frozen seas of the Southern Ocean, nature would soon demonstrate its terrifying power. By January 1915, the Endurance had entered the Weddell Sea, an area notorious for its dense, shifting pack ice and treacherous conditions. At first, the ship made steady progress, carefully navigating through leads and cracks in the ice. Shackleton hoped to reach Vosel Bay, where the team would disembark and begin the overland crossing. But the farther they sailed, the more the ice closed in around them. In the heart of the austral summer, they expected the ice to be more navigable, but the weather that year had conspired against them. Gales had pressed the pack ice tightly together, forming a nearly impenetrable barrier of frozen slabs and pressure ridges. Despite the challenges, Shackleton remained determined. He ordered the ship to forge ahead, often relying on Worsley's precise navigation and the crew's relentless efforts to break a path through the floes. The men used ice saws and picks, attempting to clear routes and widen channels. Dogs barked, sledges were prepared, and hopes remained alive that they might yet reach the coast in time. But the Weddell Sea was an unpredictable prison. On January 18, 1915, the Endurance became solidly trapped in the ice. The shifting floes closed in around her hull, crushing any forward motion and rendering her helpless. She was caught, locked in a vast white desert that stretched endlessly in every direction. At first, the men believed it would be temporary. The Antarctic summer still held promise. Perhaps a change in wind direction or temperature would loosen the pack, allowing the ship to break free. Shackleton, always calm and confident, reassured his men and kept them focused. But as the days turned into weeks and the Endurance remained imprisoned, it became clear that the ship would not be going anywhere soon. The goal of crossing the continent was abandoned. Survival now became the priority. The Endurance was more than just a vessel. It had been their sanctuary, their tool of conquest, and their connection to the world beyond the ice. As the months passed, it was transformed into a lifeboat in a frozen sea. Shackleton's leadership during this time became one of the great lessons in calm under pressure. He knew that maintaining morale was essential to their survival, even if he could not yet admit how dire the situation might become. Each day was structured and filled with activity, both practical and psychological. The crew established routines: cleaning, mending, exercising dogs, and taking scientific measurements. These tasks, though mundane, helped preserve a sense of purpose. They also relied on rituals and humor to stave off despair. Mealtimes became communal moments, often filled with jokes and songs. Frank Hurley, the expedition photographer, documented their existence in stunning images, capturing the surreal beauty and immense desolation of their surroundings. The men played games on the ice, organized concerts, and even held mock trials and talent shows. Leonard Hussey's banjo playing became a constant source of uplift. Shackleton famously insisted that the banjo be saved when the crew later had to lighten their loads, calling it vital mental medicine. Though morale remained surprisingly strong, the realities of their situation could not be ignored. The ship groaned and creaked under the relentless pressure of the ice. Deep cracks split the hull, and wooden beams buckled. The cold was unrelenting. Temperatures plummeted well below zero, and the darkness of the Antarctic winter crept in. The men adapted, insulating their quarters, patching leaks, and preparing for a long haul. The Antarctic sun disappeared below the horizon, and with it went any illusion that rescue might arrive soon. Rations had to be carefully managed. The men ate from tins and hunted seals and penguins to supplement their supplies. Shackleton allowed occasional indulgences: a spoonful of jam, an extra biscuit, whenever spirits were low. These small gestures had a powerful effect on morale. He also made a point of rotating tent groups and chore duties, so that no cliques or resentments could form. Rank was leveled. Officers and seamen shared the same meals, the same cramped sleeping quarters, and the same anxieties. By October 1915, it became clear that the Endurance was doomed. The ice had been slowly crushing her for months, and now the pressure became unbearable. Shackleton gave the order to abandon ship. The men salvaged what they could: food, sledges, instruments, clothing, and the lifeboats. The ship's hull was shattered, her stern lifted grotesquely out of the ice before she finally slipped beneath the surface on November 21st. They stood in silence as she disappeared, taking with her any hope of shelter or communication with the outside world. The men were now alone on the ice, hundreds of miles from land, with no radio contact, no rescue in sight, and only what they could carry. They called their new camp Ocean Camp, though it rested atop a drifting mass of frozen sea. The decision now was whether to stay on the ice and drift with it in hopes of reaching open water, or to begin the long trek towards solid land. Shackleton chose the former, calculating that hauling the lifeboats and supplies over the jagged, uneven surface would be too dangerous and exhausting. They waited, drifting slowly northward, watching for signs of breakup. They endured weeks of bitter cold, storms, and monotony. Eventually, when the ice began to crack and shift in the warming temperatures of late summer, Shackleton decided it was time to move. The march began, a desperate, agonizing journey across a broken landscape of snow ridges, pressure hummocks, and open leads. Men hauled sledges by hand, falling into icy water, suffering frostbite, and enduring relentless fatigue. The dogs, once loyal companions, had to be sacrificed when rations grew scarce. The burden of their cries lingered in the men's minds long afterward. Shackleton tried to make progress toward Powlett Island, where a cache of supplies had once been left during an earlier expedition. But the terrain proved impossible. After days of struggle, the party was forced to stop and establish Patience Camp, another temporary haven atop the drifting ice. There they waited once more, clinging to hope in each other. The ice was now breaking apart more rapidly, and open water occasionally appeared on the horizon. Shackleton knew they would soon have to take to the boats. Throughout this ordeal, leadership remained Shackleton's most vital contribution. He never allowed himself to appear fearful or uncertain in front of his men. He shared their hardships, took the worst watches, and made personal sacrifices. He encouraged optimism and solidarity. When men became depressed or angry, he found ways to re-engage them. He saw early the signs of mental strain and responded quickly, moving men from one duty to another or giving them more responsibility. His strength was not in commanding with an iron hand, but in quietly reinforcing the collective will to survive. By April 1916, the ice had broken enough to allow the men to launch the lifeboats. With only basic navigation tools and in boats ill-suited to stormy seas, they began their journey toward Elephant Island, one of the nearest specks of land. The trip would be a brutal test of endurance. But in those bleak months of 1915, when they had been trapped and cut off from the world, Shackleton had prepared them not just physically but mentally. He had preserved their lives by preserving their morale. What they endured during those 21 months, first aboard the Endurance, then on drifting ice floes, was more than a test of human resilience. It was a testament to the power of leadership, camaraderie, and the unbreakable will to survive. The men did not mutiny. They did not give in to despair. They listened, worked, endured, and hoped because Shackleton gave them reason to believe they still had a future. While the world was tearing itself apart in war, these men were holding themselves together in the frozen silence of the Antarctic. That perhaps was the greatest achievement of all. The final hours of the Endurance were not sudden or unexpected. Her demise came slowly, painfully, and with dreadful inevitability. For months, the Antarctic ice had seized her in a tightening grip. The wooden hull groaned and splintered under pressure, a creaking reminder of nature's might against human ambition. As the pack ice closed in around her in late 1915, it did not attack like a sudden storm, but rather like a great, indifferent vice, slowly crushing the heart of Shackleton's Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition. The ship had been trapped since January, locked within the frozen Weddell Sea, unable to escape or make progress toward the continent. Yet even in this entrapment, the men had hope. Hope that the ice might break, that leads might open, that the southern summer sun might still release them. They cleaned the ship, kept the engines ready, and stayed vigilant. But in October 1915, the sound of destruction began. Not from without, but from within. The Endurance, long defiant, began to break under the pressure. The timbers buckled audibly. Her seams opened, and water poured into the lower decks. The crew fought valiantly to save her. They manned the pumps around the clock. They reinforced bulkheads. They tried to shore up the crushed stern with ice and timbers. But the sea was already claiming her. Shackleton saw it with grim clarity. The Endurance would not survive. On October 27th, he gave the order to abandon ship. The crew salvaged everything they could: tents, sleeping bags, scientific instruments, photographic plates, sledges, and, critically, the 3 lifeboats. They unloaded food, dogs, and essential supplies, hauling them onto the sea ice where the men now stood in bleak silence. This was not merely the loss of a vessel. It was the death of a dream. The Endurance had been their bridge to civilization, their shield against the Antarctic's savage extremes. Her loss cut deep, not just physically but psychologically. The ship had been home, workplace, fortress, and symbol of their purpose. Watching her crumble, then sink into the black water beneath the ice, was a moment that none of the men would forget. It marked a definitive shift. The expedition was no longer one of conquest or exploration. It was now a fight for survival. The psychological impact of this loss varied among the men. Some, like Frank Worsley and Thomas Crean, buried their emotions in labor and duty. Others, more introspective, felt the despair creep into their thoughts as the endless white horizon offered no hope of rescue. Shackleton, however, understood the immense psychological strain this event placed on his men. From the moment the Endurance was lost, he assumed not just the role of commander, but of caretaker of morale. His calm demeanor, clear orders, and visible presence inspired confidence, even in the midst of despair. Shackleton did not allow mourning. He focused the men on the future, on survival, on each day's necessary task. He distributed duties, erecting tents, organizing rations, caring for dogs, preparing sledges, not just to maintain order, but to keep minds engaged. He rotated camp responsibilities to prevent monotony, shared leadership burdens with Frank Wild and Worsley, and made sure to involve every man in meaningful work. In moments of silence, when the weight of their situation became too heavy, he spoke gently but firmly, reminding them that their job now was to get home alive. "We must endure," he said, repeating the name of their sunken ship as a commandment. They established what they called Ocean Camp on the drifting ice floe. The name was ironic but necessary. The sea beneath them was frozen but still alive, constantly shifting, cracking, groaning. The floe was no stable foundation, yet it was all they had. They pitched tents in rows and used salvaged planks from the Endurance for flooring. The temperature dropped relentlessly. Sometimes cracks opened beneath their feet, forcing them to shift camp abruptly. They slept in the bitter cold, huddled together in canvas shelters, the polar winds howling around them. Their world had shrunk to a floating scrap of ice. Food was rationed with utmost care. Shackleton made sure everyone received the same quantity, including himself. There was no room for rank now. They relied on what they had salvaged: biscuits, pemmican, tins of beef, and powdered milk. To supplement the diet, they hunted seals and penguins. These not only provided fresh meat, but blubber for fuel and warmth. Killing and butchering became part of daily life. The dogs were still with them, their presence comforting but also a source of grim contemplation, as some men began to wonder whether they too might become necessary for survival. The men busied themselves with small routines. Leonard Hussey's banjo was saved, despite weighing 12 pounds, because Shackleton knew it lifted morale. Music, stories, chess games, and banter around the stove gave the men brief escapes from the brutal reality surrounding them. Frank Hulley continued photographing their strange existence, capturing haunting images of ice, tents, and faces marked by cold and determination. The small joys of humor and camaraderie, even in the depths of hardship, were what sustained them. Though they camped atop the drifting ice, Shackleton was already planning the next move. The ice might carry them northward toward open water. He studied the direction of drift daily, marking their position, consulting Worsley, and estimating how far they had moved. But he knew they could not remain on the floe indefinitely. It could fracture suddenly or melt beneath them. The lifeboats and sledges were their only lifelines. He ordered the boats to be constantly maintained. Supplies were packed, unpacked, repacked, always ready for an emergency retreat. The sledges were loaded and tested. They weighed the lifeboats against the conditions of the ice. Could they haul these cumbersome wooden vessels over jagged, pressure-ridged terrain? The answer was grim. The landscape was too fractured. They attempted a few hauls and quickly realized that progress was minimal and exhausting. The men, weakened by cold and rationing, could barely manage a mile a day. The dogs strained too, and even their valiant efforts were no match for the brutal ice ridges. Recognizing the futility of overland movement for the moment, Shackleton made the bold decision to stay put, at least until the floe drifted further north. He chose a larger, thicker ice platform and named their new site Patience Camp. The name was a reflection of their new strategy: wait, endure, conserve energy, and seize the right moment when the ice broke up enough to take to the boats. Meanwhile, the preparations continued. Every item in their possession was evaluated for weight and necessity. Personal belongings were reduced to a minimum. Shackleton even ordered the men to abandon gold sovereigns, watches, and books. Only essentials would be taken. Throughout this time, the leader's unshakable presence was the glue holding the group together. Shackleton never expressed doubt, even when privately overwhelmed by the magnitude of their plight. He gave each man a sense of purpose. When he sensed depression in one of the sailors, he'd shift his duty or place him with more optimistic companions. He praised initiative and discipline, but also compassion and cooperation. His genius lay not in any single decision, but in the totality of his leadership under constant strain. The cold was unrelenting, the drift slow. The pressure of the pack continued around them, massive slabs of ice groaning and colliding, as if the earth itself were shifting in protest. Their camp was sometimes lifted and cracked by these unseen forces. One night, a great fissure tore through the ice just yards from the tents. The men scrambled to save the lifeboats, to move supplies across to more stable ground. It was a terrifying reminder that their foundation was fragile, and time was running out. By March 1916, the ice began to show more signs of movement and melting. Small pools of water formed on the surface. Leads opened briefly in the distance. The temperature had risen ever so slightly. Shackleton knew the moment of departure was approaching. He redoubled his efforts in preparing the boats, the James Caird, the Dudley Docker, and the Stancomb Wills. Each was checked, caulked, equipped with sails, oars, and the limited food they could spare. Navigational instruments were packed: chronometers, sextants, and Worsley's maps and charts. Still, there was no certainty. Taking to open water in those boats would be extraordinarily risky. The Southern Ocean was among the most violent on Earth. The boats were designed for inshore use, not for riding swells or surviving storms. But the ice was thinning. Cracks appeared regularly. Any moment could be the last. The escape had to be timed perfectly, early enough to avoid catastrophe, but not so soon that they were swallowed by freezing seas. Shackleton's men trusted him absolutely, even as they feared what lay ahead. They had survived the sinking of their ship, the collapse of their mission, and the crushing isolation of the Antarctic ice. They were tired, frostbitten, and often hungry, but their leader had kept them united. Now, as the floe beneath them began to groan its final warning, they made ready for the next phase of this epic ordeal: an escape by sea across one of the most unforgiving stretches of ocean in the world. The decision to set sail in the James Caird was one of both desperation and hope. The group of men left behind on the ice floe had already endured so much. Their ship was lost, the ice had held them captive for months, and any hope of rescue had seemed as remote as the stars themselves. But Shackleton's refusal to give in to despair, his drive to lead, and his relentless belief that the journey was not over spurred him to make the boldest decision of all: to attempt a perilous voyage to South Georgia Island, a small speck of land that was the closest hope of rescue. The preparations were made in the harshest conditions imaginable. Shackleton, Frank Worsley, and 4 other men, Thomas Crean, Timothy McCarthy, John Vincent, and William Bakewell, had been selected for the voyage. These men, in Shackleton's eyes, possessed not only the necessary skills, but also the essential resilience. As a crew of 6, they would navigate through one of the most treacherous parts of the world, a journey that was considered almost suicidal. The remaining men on the ice floe would continue their wait, hoping that Shackleton's audacity would lead to something, anything, that might bring them the salvation they had desperately longed for. The James Caird was a 22-foot lifeboat, small, cramped, and not equipped for long-distance ocean travel. Shackleton had no illusions about the boat's ability to handle the open sea. It was designed for use in calmer waters, to carry men from ship to shore, not to brave the wild storms and waves of the Southern Ocean. The lifeboat was strengthened as best as possible, with its interior loaded with as much food, water, and supplies as could be spared. Shackleton knew that every ounce of weight mattered. Any extra supplies might mean the difference between survival and disaster. With the crew aboard and the James Caird launched into the cold, unforgiving sea, they began their journey toward Elephant Island, the closest piece of land to their position. The journey was a mere 30 miles away, but the sea was churning and the winds howling. Even such a small distance in such treacherous conditions was an extraordinary feat. Shackleton's leadership shone through in every decision. The men, already exhausted from their time on the ice, had to push through physical and mental barriers just to make it to the island. The cold was oppressive, freezing spray hit them in unrelenting waves, and the horizon seemed an endless line of white and gray. As the boat neared Elephant Island, the sense of relief was palpable. They had made it to land, and yet there was little celebration. The reality was far from a happy ending. The men had now arrived at a place that would offer no real safety. The island was isolated, inhospitable, and far from the nearest human settlement. But it was a temporary reprieve, a stop on the long road to salvation. The crew quickly set up camp on the rocky shore, sheltering themselves in the small tents that were hastily erected. Shackleton knew that this was not a final destination. It was just another waypoint in the long journey ahead. The true challenge had yet to come. Once on Elephant Island, the men had a brief moment of respite. They rested, recouped, and managed to stretch their legs for the first time in what felt like ages. Yet, as Shackleton and Worsley discussed their next steps, a grim realization began to set in. The island, while offering temporary shelter, was not a safe haven. There were no nearby vessels, no fishing boats, no civilization for hundreds of miles in any direction. Even if a ship passed within range, the chances of it spotting their small encampment were slim. For Shackleton, the time had come to face the most terrifying truth of all. Rescue would not come for them unless he acted. And the only option was to attempt the 800-mile voyage to South Georgia Island, a place where he knew there might be a whaling station that could rescue the men. It was a daunting prospect. The journey was fraught with unimaginable dangers. The seas between Elephant Island and South Georgia were notorious for their unpredictability, stormy conditions, and freezing waters. Navigating this stretch was not only difficult but life-threatening. Few people had ever attempted such a crossing, and none had done it in such primitive conditions. The decision was made. Shackleton, Worsley, and 4 of the most reliable men would sail the James Caird across the Southern Ocean. The other men would remain behind on Elephant Island, continuing to endure the harsh conditions as they awaited Shackleton's return. This was a mission that could not fail. If Shackleton failed, all hope would be lost. He knew the risks, but he also knew that this was their only chance for survival. The voyage itself began in early April, and the small boat was immediately tested by the ferocity of the Southern Ocean. The winds were fierce, the seas violent. The James Caird was tossed around like a toy on the choppy waves. Shackleton and Worsley took turns at the helm, navigating using a combination of dead reckoning and the limited celestial navigation tools they had salvaged. They had no charts to guide them, only their experience and the limited knowledge they had of the region. The journey was physically brutal. The men fought seasickness, exhaustion, and the constant threat of hypothermia. Each wave that crashed over them threatened to swallow the boat whole. The men could not afford to sleep for long periods, as they had to keep the boat pointed in the right direction at all times. It was a dangerous, continuous struggle for survival. The men had to rely on each other in ways they had never imagined. Their lives were now bound together in a battle against the elements. Each man had his own role. Some were at the oars, others kept the boat steady, while Shackleton and Worsley remained focused on the navigation. Every man worked tirelessly to keep the boat afloat and on course. Days passed with no sign of land. The men could not afford to stop, even for rest. The ice-cold waters gnawed at their skin, and the air was filled with biting winds. At times, Shackleton doubted whether they would ever make it. But his resolve never wavered. He kept his focus on the task at hand, encouraging his men and leading with an unwavering determination. He gave orders in a calm, authoritative voice, showing no sign of weakness or fear. He knew that the men looked to him for strength, and he could not afford to let them see any crack in his demeanor. His presence was the glue that kept them going, even in the most desperate moments. As the days stretched into weeks, the men began to lose their sense of time. The endless waves, the icy winds, and the dark sky became their only reality. Despite the harsh conditions, they continued to press on. And then, finally, after a grueling 16 days at sea, they saw it, South Georgia Island, rising from the horizon like a ghostly silhouette. It was a moment of pure elation mixed with disbelief. They had made it. But the journey was not over yet. South Georgia was not their salvation, it was just another challenge. The island was rugged and steep, and it was not easy to approach. The boat was still in dire condition, and they had to navigate treacherous waters to land safely. The men were exhausted, delirious and frostbitten, but their spirits lifted at the sight of land. They had crossed one of the most dangerous seas in the world in a small boat with nothing but their wits and determination. Shackleton had proven that there was always hope, no matter how bleak the situation seemed. But they knew that their ordeal was far from over. South Georgia Island was their first step toward survival, but it was only the beginning of yet another perilous phase in the journey. When they finally landed on South Georgia, Shackleton's crew was physically broken, but they had achieved the impossible. They had navigated through a storm-tossed ocean, crossing 800 miles in a tiny boat, under conditions that defied belief. Shackleton's leadership, unwavering will, and relentless courage had carried them through. However, the journey was far from over. Shackleton still had to find help for the men left behind on Elephant Island, but for now, they had survived the worst of the storm. Their courage, grit, and Shackleton's unparalleled leadership had seen them through the unimaginable. The journey across South Georgia Island was one of the most grueling and extraordinary feats of human endurance in history. Shackleton and his 5 men had crossed 800 miles of the most dangerous seas in the world in a small, battered lifeboat. Their arrival at South Georgia marked a crucial, yet terrifying new stage in their ordeal. They had reached land, but they were on the wrong side of the island. This was not a place that could provide them shelter or the chance of easy survival. Shackleton had hoped for a warm, welcoming port, a whaling station where they could secure a ship to take them back to civilization. But instead, they had found themselves on a desolate, icy stretch of coastline, far from the whaling station at Stromness. The island itself was an inhospitable place, a jagged mass of glaciers, steep cliffs, and towering mountains. It was uncharted in terms of practical navigation. Shackleton and his men had no maps, no guides, and no reliable sense of how to traverse the mountainous terrain. What they did have, however, was Shackleton's leadership and determination. There was no question of retreating or waiting for a miracle. They had to move forward. Their only option was to cross the island and find the whaling station. The route was unknown, and the path ahead was treacherous. The mountains loomed before them like immovable giants, and the weather was unpredictable and harsh. Shackleton, undeterred by the enormity of the task, led his crew up the mountain slopes. Their equipment was rudimentary at best. The men were exhausted from the grueling sea journey, and the harsh conditions of South Georgia Island were doing little to ease their suffering. They had no climbing gear, no ropes, and no proper clothing for mountaineering. They were walking blind, hoping for the best but prepared for the worst. Shackleton's decision to push on, even in the face of almost certain failure, showed just how much his men trusted him. They followed him not just out of necessity, but out of a belief that he was the only one who could see them through this seemingly impossible journey. The terrain they faced was unlike anything they had encountered before. The island's mountains were not only steep, but were covered in snow and ice, making the journey even more treacherous. As the days passed, the physical toll on the men became evident. Their bodies were tired, and their minds were beginning to falter. There were moments when it seemed that the journey would end in failure, when the overwhelming weight of the mountains and the ice would finally break their resolve. But Shackleton kept pushing forward, never allowing his men to give in to the despair that might have overtaken them. His leadership was the glue that held the team together. Every step, every hour, was a test of their mental fortitude and their loyalty to Shackleton. He was their beacon, and he would not let them fall. The climb itself was a perilous battle against nature. The men had to navigate through thick snowdrifts, steep slopes, and ice-covered rocks. Each step was slow, careful, and exhausting. The wind howled around them, making it difficult to see and even harder to breathe. The cold seeped into their bones, and the physical exhaustion of the climb took a toll on their bodies. But Shackleton, with his unshakable determination, never hesitated. He encouraged his men, kept them focused, and never let them forget why they were making this journey. They had to reach Stromness, and they had to do it quickly. Finally, after days of difficult climbing, Shackleton and his men arrived at the summit. From there, they could see the whaling station in the distance, a small cluster of buildings nestled on the shore. But the journey was far from over. They still had to descend the mountains, traverse glaciers, and navigate difficult terrain to reach Stromness. The final leg of their journey was as difficult as anything they had encountered. The descent was steep and treacherous, and the men were physically and mentally drained. Yet Shackleton, ever the leader, refused to let them stop. When they finally reached Stromness, they were met with a sense of relief that can only be understood by those who have experienced the depths of physical and mental exhaustion. Shackleton and his crew had crossed an island that many thought impossible to cross. They had done it with no maps, no gear, and very little in the way of food and supplies. They had pushed their bodies to the limit and had come out on the other side, battered but alive. Shackleton's leadership had seen them through the worst. They had made it to safety. The journey across South Georgia Island was one of the most defining moments of Shackleton's life. It showed the strength of his character, the depth of his leadership, and his refusal to accept defeat. His ability to inspire loyalty and trust in his men, even under the most extreme conditions, was nothing short of extraordinary. Shackleton's determination to succeed, to get his men to safety, was what ultimately saved them. Without his unwavering resolve, the journey would have ended in tragedy. But with him at the helm, they had overcome what seemed insurmountable. Once Shackleton had made contact with the whaling station, he quickly arranged for a rescue mission. He knew that his men on Elephant Island were still waiting, still trapped in the ice, and time was running out. Every moment that passed was one more chance for disaster. The weather was unpredictable, and Shackleton knew that if the weather turned, his men could be lost forever. The rescue came in the form of the Chilean vessel Yelcho, a ship that had been sent to retrieve Shackleton's men from Elephant Island. Shackleton had managed to arrange for the ship to make the long journey through the ice to the island. It was a journey that had to be made quickly, as the ice was beginning to shift, and there was a real fear that the men might be trapped or lost before they could be rescued. The Yelcho made it through the ice, and with Shackleton's help, the men were brought aboard. One by one, the 22 men who had been stranded on Elephant Island were rescued. They were exhausted, malnourished, and emotionally drained, but they were alive. The miracle of endurance and leadership that Shackleton had demonstrated throughout the ordeal had brought them to this point. The world's reaction to Shackleton's success was one of awe and admiration. The story of the rescue spread quickly, and Shackleton became a hero in the eyes of the public. His remarkable leadership, his courage, and his ability to inspire his men had captured the imagination of people around the world. Shackleton's name became synonymous with endurance, with overcoming the odds, and with the triumph of the human spirit. Yet Shackleton's humility in the face of his success was equally remarkable. He never sought personal glory or fame. He always credited his men for their courage and resilience. He downplayed his own role, focusing instead on the collective effort of the team. Shackleton's humility, despite the incredible success of his leadership, endeared him to people around the world. His story was one of both personal triumph and selflessness. He had led his men through the darkest of times, not for personal gain, but for their survival. The rescue and return to civilization marked the end of one of the most incredible expeditions in history. Shackleton and his men had endured unimaginable hardship, but through it all, Shackleton's leadership and unrelenting determination had seen them through. The world had witnessed a miracle of endurance, and Shackleton's legacy as one of the greatest leaders in history had been cemented. The story of his leadership, courage, and humility would inspire generations to come, and his name would be forever linked with the triumph of the human spirit in the face of adversity. After returning from the harrowing events of the Imperial Trans-Antarctic Expedition, Shackleton found himself in a world that had been irrevocably changed by the First World War. The global landscape, once shaped by imperial ambitions and exploratory fervor, had shifted dramatically. The war had altered not only the political and economic dynamics of nations, but also the psyche of the public. Shackleton, a hero in the eyes of many, now found himself navigating this new world, one that demanded a different kind of leadership and vision. His previous triumphs, especially the extraordinary survival story of the Endurance Expedition, had earned him a place of great respect, but this respect came with the weight of expectations. Shackleton now sought to channel his experience and leadership skills into further expeditions, lectures, and literary endeavors, attempting to secure both personal redemption and financial stability after the collapse of his earlier ventures. The war had decimated the global economy and left its scars on every aspect of society. Shackleton, ever the resourceful adventurer, saw this changing landscape as both a challenge and an opportunity. In the aftermath of the war, there was a renewed fascination with exploration, but also a growing awareness that such expeditions were more expensive and dangerous than ever before. Shackleton, no longer the young, ambitious explorer of his earlier days, had to contend with the realities of age, financial instability, and the post-war economic depression. His lectures, which had captivated audiences worldwide in the years following his rescue, now became one of his primary sources of income. These lectures were not just about recounting his past exploits, but were infused with deeper reflections on leadership, survival, and the human spirit in the face of extreme adversity. Shackleton also began to work on writing books, trying to turn his experiences into tangible contributions to the world of exploration and leadership. His writings sought to distill the lessons he had learned on the ice and the seas into valuable insights for future generations. These endeavors, however, were fraught with financial difficulties. Despite his fame and the respect he commanded as an explorer, Shackleton struggled to secure the kind of financial backing needed to fund his dreams of future expeditions. His earlier, more successful expeditions had been funded through a mixture of public and private financing, but the economic conditions of the post-war world made such endeavors increasingly difficult. Shackleton, however, was not a man easily deterred. He knew the importance of maintaining his image as an explorer, and he continued to fight for the financial backing needed to realize his dreams. In 1921, Shackleton embarked on what would become his final expedition, the Quest Expedition. This expedition was different from his previous ones. It was not a bold, audacious attempt to traverse the Antarctic or conquer the unknown. Instead, it was a more subdued journey, focusing on scientific exploration and the investigation of the geographical features of the Antarctic region. Shackleton's decision to embark on this expedition was driven by both a desire for personal redemption and the need to secure financial stability. The Quest expedition, however, would prove to be a tragic end to Shackleton's illustrious career. Shackleton's health had begun to deteriorate in the years following his previous expeditions, and the physical toll of years spent battling the elements had taken its toll. Despite this, he remained determined to lead one more expedition, to finish what he had started, and to once again prove his resilience and leadership. Shackleton was in his early 50s when he set out on the Quest expedition, but his determination remained undiminished. The expedition began in the early part of 1921, with Shackleton at the helm, but the journey was fraught with difficulties from the start. Shackleton had to contend with the same financial struggles that had plagued him in the past. His health was failing, and the financial backing for the Quest expedition was less than ideal. However, Shackleton's ability to inspire loyalty and dedication in his men ensured that the expedition continued, despite the many obstacles they faced. During the expedition, Shackleton's health worsened rapidly. He had suffered from a series of health issues in the past, including bouts of illness and exhaustion from his previous expeditions, but his body was now beginning to betray him in earnest. Shackleton had always been a man of immense physical endurance, but even he could not escape the ravages of time. As the expedition continued, it became increasingly clear that Shackleton would not be able to complete the journey. On January 5, 1922, Shackleton suffered a fatal heart attack while aboard the ship. His death marked the end of an era in polar exploration. Shackleton's death was a tragic and poignant moment in the history of exploration. The man who had led his men through some of the harshest environments on Earth, the man who had inspired loyalty and courage in the face of certain death, was no longer there. His passing was felt deeply by those who had followed him, as well as by the larger world of exploration. Shackleton had not only been a hero, he had been a symbol of human resilience and determination. His death in South Georgia Island, the place where his previous expeditions had ended, seemed almost symbolic. Shackleton, who had survived the harshest conditions of the Antarctic, was now gone, taken by a condition that could not be survived by even the most determined man. Shackleton was buried on South Georgia Island, the place where his final expedition had ended. His burial site became a symbol of the man's legacy, a fitting tribute to one of the greatest leaders in the history of exploration. The phrase "he belongs to the Antarctic" was inscribed on his gravestone, a reflection of the deep connection Shackleton had with the frozen, unforgiving land. Shackleton's burial on the island was not just a physical resting place. It was a reminder of his profound relationship with the Antarctic and of the incredible journey he had undertaken. The island, like Shackleton himself, was a symbol of endurance, of survival, and of the power of human will. Shackleton's final years were marked by a sense of personal and professional struggle. Although he had achieved greatness, the post-war world was not as kind to him as it had been in his earlier years. Shackleton's efforts to secure financial backing for his expeditions, as well as his personal health struggles, left him in a precarious position. Despite these challenges, Shackleton's leadership and resilience remained a constant throughout his life. His ability to inspire and lead, even in the face of overwhelming odds, made him a figure of enduring significance. Shackleton's death did not mark the end of his legacy. In fact, it solidified his place as one of the greatest leaders in the history of exploration. The leadership lessons that Shackleton imparted through his actions were far-reaching. His ability to inspire loyalty, manage crises, and make difficult decisions under extreme pressure became a model for leaders in a wide range of fields. Shackleton's leadership was not just about surviving, it was about thriving in the face of adversity. He taught those who followed him the importance of maintaining morale, of making tough decisions with limited resources, and of never giving up, no matter how dire the situation. Shackleton's final years, though marked by personal tragedy and struggle, were also a testament to his unyielding spirit. His legacy lives on, not just in the history of polar exploration, but also in the world of leadership. The lessons he left behind, particularly his ability to maintain hope and inspire those around him, continue to resonate in leadership contexts today. Shackleton's story is not just one of survival. It is a story of triumph, of leadership under extreme conditions, and of the power of the human spirit to overcome even the most impossible odds. Ernest Shackleton's legacy is not confined to the annals of polar exploration. It has rippled across literature, education, leadership studies, and popular culture, leaving an indelible mark on how we understand human perseverance, leadership in crisis, and the enduring strength of the human spirit. Shackleton's story, particularly the saga of the Endurance Expedition, has transcended its historical roots to become a touchstone for discussions on resilience, teamwork, and leadership under extreme pressure. His remarkable feats continue to inspire people in all fields, from adventurers to entrepreneurs, who find his perseverance in the face of overwhelming odds a model of how to confront and overcome adversity. The legacy of Shackleton's journey is frequently explored in literature. Various accounts of Shackleton's expeditions, particularly the Endurance mission, have been chronicled by historians, biographers, and even those who lived through the ordeal. Books like Endurance, Shackleton's Incredible Voyage, by Alfred Lansing, and Shackleton, by Roland Huntford, are among the most famous works that detail the harrowing journey of Shackleton and his crew. These works are not just recountings of a historical event, but also reflections on leadership, sacrifice, and the ability to thrive even when survival seems impossible. In literature, Shackleton's story stands as a testament to human grit, a powerful reminder of what can be achieved when ordinary individuals are forced to meet extraordinary challenges. Through these books, Shackleton's legacy has been immortalized, inspiring readers across generations to believe that even in the most hopeless situations, survival is possible through perseverance, collaboration, and leadership. In the world of education, Shackleton's story is widely used as a case study in leadership, crisis management, and the study of human behavior under stress. His capacity to lead a group of men through a 2-year ordeal, overcoming not only the brutal conditions of the Antarctic, but also the psychological strains of isolation, hunger, and fear, makes his story one of the most profound examples of leadership in modern history. In classrooms around the world, Shackleton's example is used to teach valuable lessons in resilience, teamwork, and the importance of maintaining morale during periods of crisis. He is often held up as the archetype of the leader, who places the welfare of his team above his own and uses creativity and resourcefulness to solve insurmountable problems. His ability to remain calm under pressure, maintain optimism, and inspire confidence in his men in the most dire of circumstances is a vital aspect of his educational legacy. Business schools, military academies, and leadership seminars often draw upon his example to teach strategic thinking, decision-making, and moral leadership. The field of leadership studies has also been profoundly influenced by Shackleton's example. Scholars and experts in leadership have examined his techniques and methodologies in order to understand how Shackleton managed to achieve what he did despite seemingly insurmountable challenges. Shackleton's leadership style, characterized by empathy, emotional intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to maintain morale in the face of extreme adversity, serves as a model for contemporary leadership theories. He was able to foster a sense of loyalty and unity among his men, ensuring that even in the bleakest moments, they remained focused on survival and cooperation. He was also a master at managing conflicting personalities and ensuring that the crew, despite their vast differences, worked together toward a common goal. The leadership studies field has long regarded Shackleton as a prime example of how the human spirit, when guided by exceptional leadership, can overcome even the harshest conditions. His legacy in leadership is particularly pertinent in the business world, where his lessons in crisis management, teamwork, and decision-making are routinely applied. Shackleton's cultural impact extends beyond the worlds of literature and academia. The rediscovery of the wreck of the Endurance in 2022 further cemented his legacy and reawakened global interest in his remarkable journey. The wreck, preserved by the cold Antarctic waters, serves as a powerful symbol of Shackleton's determination and the audacity of his mission. The finding of the Endurance wreck was not just a historical discovery, but also a cultural milestone. It sparked renewed interest in Shackleton's expeditions, with documentaries, books, and articles revisiting his story and the lessons it imparts to modern audiences. The wreck, a ghostly reminder of the dangers and sacrifices of polar exploration, continues to captivate the imagination of people worldwide. The relic of the Endurance stands as an enduring monument to Shackleton's vision, his unyielding determination, and the incredible endurance of his crew. Shackleton's legacy has also inspired a new generation of adventurers and entrepreneurs who find in his story a wellspring of motivation. The challenges faced by Shackleton and his crew are not dissimilar to the struggles faced by those attempting to achieve success in business or venture into the unknown. Entrepreneurs, especially those in fields that require great risk-taking and perseverance, often cite Shackleton as a role model. His ability to pivot under pressure, his resourcefulness, and his willingness to make hard decisions in moments of crisis are traits that resonate strongly with modern-day business leaders. Adventurers, too, continue to draw inspiration from Shackleton's expeditions. His ability to face seemingly insurmountable odds, navigate vast unknowns, and inspire his men to stay united and hopeful in the face of disaster is a lesson that resonates deeply with those who seek to push the boundaries of human exploration. Shackleton's impact on polar exploration remains profound. His expedition, though ultimately a failure in terms of its original goal to cross Antarctica, is considered one of the greatest feats of human endurance and survival in the history of exploration. The sheer determination and ingenuity required to survive the ordeal, coupled with Shackleton's steadfast leadership, make his journey a critical chapter in the history of polar exploration. Shackleton's ability to face the worst conditions in the world and still manage to bring his entire crew home safely demonstrates the incredible resilience of the human spirit. He didn't just survive the Antarctic. He triumphed over it in a way that no one could have predicted. His polar expeditions have become a benchmark for the toughness required in the field of exploration and the lengths to which explorers must go to endure the most extreme conditions on Earth. Shackleton's legacy is a testament to human perseverance. His story is one of defiance in the face of overwhelming odds, of leadership in the darkest hours, and of an unbreakable spirit that continues to inspire individuals in all walks of life. It is a story that proves the power of human resolve and the extraordinary things that can be accomplished when we refuse to give up, no matter how impossible the circumstances may seem. Shackleton's life continues to serve as an inspiration for historians, explorers, psychologists, and modern leaders. To this day, Shackleton's story resonates deeply with those who study human behavior, crisis management, and leadership in extreme situations. His unwavering determination to save his crew, maintain morale, and lead through adversity continues to inspire countless professionals. Experts in psychology and organizational behavior often reflect on the mental and emotional toll Shackleton's leadership took on his men, and how his efforts to keep spirits high and focus on survival rather than the despair of failure allowed his crew to endure what seemed impossible. His leadership has been analyzed extensively in the fields of psychology and organizational behavior, and lessons from his approach to team building, decision-making, and emotional management are used to educate modern leaders in high-pressure environments. Shackleton's ability to maintain a sense of optimism, his refusal to let his men lose hope, and his focus on keeping a steady hand in times of crisis all provide valuable insights into what it takes to lead when everything seems lost. His capacity to inspire resilience, even in the most demoralizing circumstances, is something that resonates with modern leaders who are tasked with guiding teams through turbulence and uncertainty. Shackleton's story has also found a prominent place in modern problem-solving and leadership seminars. His adventures have become integral to teaching strategies for handling crises, maintaining morale, and making decisions when resources are limited. Modern leadership programs often incorporate Shackleton's strategies, emphasizing the importance of adaptability, loyalty, communication, and emotional intelligence when navigating through difficult times. Whether in the corporate boardroom, the military, or a humanitarian mission, Shackleton's methods of dealing with adversity are regularly applied to improve decision-making processes and bolster leadership skills. In all of these fields, Shackleton's story is a reminder that perseverance, determination, and empathy are key elements in leadership and survival. His life has become a blueprint for anyone faced with the task of leading through adversity. Shackleton's journey continues to be relevant to modern-day problem-solving, as it provides not only a historical perspective, but also a timeless set of principles that can guide individuals and teams toward success, even in the most challenging of circumstances. Shackleton's legacy is multifaceted, extending beyond the world of polar exploration to touch all those who believe that human resilience is capable of overcoming the harshest conditions and greatest obstacles. The story of Shackleton, his endurance crew, and their incredible survival against all odds remains one of the greatest testaments to the power of leadership, hope, and determination in human history. Ernest Shackleton's journey as an explorer and humanist stands as one of the most remarkable in the history of polar exploration and human endurance. His expeditions, particularly the ill-fated Endurance Journey, have become iconic examples of what it means to lead in the face of extreme adversity. Shackleton's voyage was not just a testament to the physical and mental endurance required to survive in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. It was a demonstration of the power of human spirit, resilience, and leadership. He was not just an adventurer seeking fame or glory. He was a humanist who believed deeply in the welfare of his crew, making his leadership and decision-making style stand out as truly extraordinary. Shackleton's achievements, while rooted in the realm of exploration, were more than mere physical feats of survival. They were a demonstration of his deep understanding of human nature, his commitment to his men, and his unwavering belief in the potential for the human spirit to triumph over even the most difficult circumstances. His focus on keeping morale high, ensuring that each member of the crew felt valued, and his constant attention to their emotional and psychological needs, all speak to his recognition of the human dimension in exploration. Shackleton knew that survival was not just about conquering nature. It was also about maintaining hope, fostering loyalty, and ensuring that his men remained united in their common goal. Shackleton's symbolic place among the greatest adventurers in history cannot be overstated. His name is synonymous with resilience, leadership, and the ability to maintain hope when all seems lost. In the annals of history, he is placed alongside other great explorers such as Christopher Columbus, Marco Polo, and Robert Falcon Scott, who ventured into the unknown, seeking to push the limits of human exploration. However, Shackleton's legacy goes beyond the exploration of uncharted territories. It is also about the human ability to endure and adapt under extreme pressure. Where others might have given up, Shackleton's unyielding spirit drove him to continue, not only to save his crew, but also to inspire generations of leaders and adventurers. His symbolic place in the history of exploration is grounded in his leadership during the Endurance Expedition, which demonstrated that true exploration is about more than just physical achievement. It is about the courage to face the unknown with resolve, the wisdom to understand the limitations of the human body and mind, and the strength of character to make difficult decisions for the greater good of the team. Shackleton did not achieve his goal of crossing Antarctica, but in the process he achieved something far greater. He saved the lives of his men, and in doing so, set a new standard for what it means to be a leader in extreme conditions. Shackleton's ability to inspire and lead through the most unimaginable hardships has made his story resonate across time. His leadership, deeply rooted in empathy, decision-making under duress, and the ability to maintain a clear sense of purpose despite the overwhelming challenges, remains a model for modern leaders in every field. In businesses, military units, educational institutions, and humanitarian organizations, Shackleton's name is invoked to remind people that leadership is about resilience, empathy, and an unwavering focus on the collective goal, even when circumstances seem insurmountable. The impact of Shackleton's legacy extends beyond leadership principles, touching the realms of human potential and the ability to overcome adversity. His story reminds us that the greatest challenges often reveal the strength we did not know we possessed. Shackleton's journey shows that even when the odds are stacked against us, it is possible to persevere, adapt, and ultimately triumph. This lesson is particularly resonant in today's world, where individuals and societies are facing unprecedented challenges, from climate change to global political instability and economic uncertainty. Shackleton's story continues to serve as a beacon of hope and determination in the face of overwhelming adversity. In today's uncertain world, Shackleton's story resonates as a symbol of the power of the human spirit to endure and overcome even the most daunting challenges. The lessons we can learn from his journey are as relevant today as they were during the early 20th century. Shackleton's leadership, his ability to inspire trust and loyalty in his men, and his unwavering belief in their collective strength provide us with timeless principles that transcend the specific circumstances of polar exploration. His journey is a reminder that we must never give up, no matter how difficult the journey may seem. Shackleton's legacy teaches us that success is not always about achieving a predefined goal, but about the ability to adapt, maintain hope, and work together as a team to navigate through uncertainty. Shackleton's place in history as an adventurer and humanist is secure, not because of the geographical discoveries he made or the medals he won, but because of his unwavering commitment to his crew and his ability to lead them through seemingly impossible circumstances. He faced immense challenges, but it was his capacity to inspire hope, to make tough decisions, and to put the well-being of his men first that set him apart from other explorers. Shackleton's story shows that true leadership is not about commanding authority, but about serving others, showing compassion, and remaining resolute in the face of adversity. In conclusion, Shackleton's journey as an explorer and humanist holds a place of unique significance in the history of adventure and leadership. His story transcends the confines of polar exploration and stands as a timeless testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Shackleton's symbolic place among the greatest adventurers in history is not only a reflection of his physical achievements, but also of his ability to lead with empathy, adaptability, and unwavering determination. His legacy continues to inspire leaders, adventurers, and ordinary people alike, reminding us that even in the darkest times, it is possible to find hope, strength, and the will to persevere. Shackleton's story remains relevant in today's uncertain world, offering valuable lessons for navigating the challenges we face and reinforcing the belief that with the right leadership and mindset, there is no obstacle too great to overcome. Ernest Shackleton's name has become synonymous with the indomitable will to survive against all odds. His extraordinary journey to the Antarctic, marked by relentless challenges and incredible feats of leadership, transcends the realm of exploration to embody the essence of human perseverance. Shackleton's story is not just one of navigating icy wilderness and facing the most extreme conditions on Earth. It is a saga of hope, resilience, and the power of leadership in the darkest of times. His remarkable ability to keep his crew alive through an unimaginable ordeal, coupled with his unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit, ensures that his legacy continues to inspire adventurers, leaders, and dreamers around the world. As we reflect on his life and the lessons it holds, Shackleton's story serves as a powerful reminder that even when the path ahead seems impossible, the will to endure can light the way.